In a world drowning in data, open source intelligence is the difference between noise and insight. I'm Jake Krebs, and this is the OSINT Podcast, unpacking the tools, tactics, and techniques that matter to the OSINT community. Whether you're tracking threats, analyzing platforms, or just trying to separate signal from noise, this is your go-to resource for all things open source intelligence. Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome to the 19th episode of the OSINT Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Krebs. In today's episode, we're going to be covering issue number 107 and 108 of the OSINT Newsletter. Issue number 107 is titled Call Data, OSINT on Phone Numbers. It's a beginner's guide to investigating phone numbers. And then the paid issue, which is issue 108, is Codifying Open Source Intelligence Methodology with AI. And this will be a continuation from issue number 106 of the OSINT Newsletter. Some quick housekeeping: make sure that you are checking out our Capture the Flag events. We do them every single week. You can find them at ctf.osintnewsletter.com. In addition, we have an ever-expanding tool set at tools.osintnewsletter.com, where you can check out and find tools that will help you with your use case in collecting open source intelligence, analyzing it, or disseminating it accordingly. Also, make sure to subscribe to this podcast if you've enjoyed it. Go back through the archive and check out a few other episodes if you are new here. You can subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts, as well as following us on social media. We are the most prolific on x.com and LinkedIn, so you can find us on there. There's an account both for the newsletter and the podcast. Make sure to follow both because we have a little bit of different content depending on the context. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. I'll go ahead and start with issue number 107. You can follow along at osintnewsletter.com/107. All right, issue number 107, again, is Call Data, OSINT on Phone Numbers. It is a high-level beginner's guide for investigating phone numbers. And so why phone numbers? Why is that important? Well, if you think about it, most people have phone numbers for a very long period of time. While they can exchange hands over time, it's very common that people have the same phone number for at least a decade, maybe even longer. It's only really business phone numbers and people who travel very frequently or change locations very frequently that change their phone numbers. So when you're looking into a phone number, especially if it's not a burner account, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it is a very reliable data point when it comes to resolving the identity of an individual or an organization. We overall discuss different tools, tactics, and techniques that you can use to find identities behind phone numbers. And we do this at a very, very high level, and we get down into things that are a little bit more granular in issue number 107. So at the very high level, you have things like, of course, country codes, right? What country code is this phone number from? Depending on your purview, the country code may be omitted. Like if you're in the United States, for example, they don't always include the +1 on every single phone number. However, when you are dealing with international phone numbers, you can always start with the country code in order to get the country that it's from. In addition to that, you can look at area codes, for example. There's a variety of different names for the international equivalent of area codes. But for example, in the United States, you have your 3-digit area code that lets you know where the phone number is issued from. And so some states in the United States have several different area codes that you can associate to a very specific region. And what this tells you is this tells you the country that they're in, as well as the specific geographic location where that phone number was issued. So it may not be that they are specifically in that location now, but they do have a history of being in that location at one time. Then we pivot on into platform presence. You can check a phone number against a variety of different messaging platforms like WhatsApp or Telegram. There's a ton of platforms that you can use for looking into phone numbers. Another life hack that you can do with that is you can put a phone number into your address book. You can import contacts, and you can see if there's any phone numbers that are associated with apps that may not be directly associated with phone numbers, like social media, games, and a variety of other different platforms that require or ask you to add your phone number in as an input. Then from there, obviously you can go into search engines. A lot of times there are companies that scrape information about phone numbers and associate them to people. So for example, voter records often have phone numbers, which can get really annoying, especially here in the United States. When you have your phone number that's listed with your voter registration, then you get a ton of different phone calls that are associated with that record that was scraped and published online. You also see the same thing with like patent applications, copyright stuff, LLC filings, things like that. Your phone number and other people's phone numbers are floating around everywhere. They end up in person search engines, and you're able to find information about an individual. You may find whether or not it is the current individual that owns that phone number, or even historical information to prove that that phone number has changed hands over time. We go on in the article to talk about the different tools that actually work when it comes to looking into a phone number. Of course, there's a variety of different caller ID platforms, things like NumLookup, That's Them, Sync.me, for example. I've used That's Them a ton in the past. You can also use True People Search, for example, look up phone numbers. This gives you a bunch of historical information. I don't think it's going to be very accurate for brand new information that has been created recently. So if new phone numbers have been associated to individuals very recently, I think it's more difficult to get that information. However, if you are dealing with phone numbers that have been in the hands of a single individual for quite some time, let's say 10, 15 years, a lot of these platforms are going to have that information stored for you. I already mentioned checking the different apps. Some things that are just top of mind: WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal. Those are probably the places you want to start. WhatsApp, Telegram, and Signal are also globally used, so there's a good chance you're going to be able to find a tip there. There's a variety of different methods that you can use to be able to use that method. There are direct lookups where you can put a phone number into an API call, for example, and it'll be able to tell you if it's registered or not. And then there's also the contact import trick that you can use if you are wanting to do that instead. Then there are things like carrier data that you can find from places like NumVerify and Twilio Lookup. This will tell you which carrier is associated with a particular phone number, so you can narrow down who is the cell phone provider, which may be something that might be useful for law enforcement, for example, or a variety of other different investigative methods, where if you want to be able to see if something is a mobile phone, a voice over IP phone, a landline, etc. From there, we talk about a clean workflow to take you from beginning to end. And this is where I think it's really helpful for beginners who haven't really done this a lot to take this format and be able to scale it and be able to use it over and over. And so the first thing is, obviously you want to convert everything into an international format. The reason why you want to do this is because there's a lot of different tools that require you to put it in international format. And if you're dealing with a lot of different phone numbers, you don't want to manually enter the country code for every single phone number. So go ahead and just input it into whatever database you're using, whether it's a spreadsheet or anything else, with the international format in it already. Then if you want to augment your search, you can go ahead and combine that with geographic information. Like I mentioned, the country code with the area code, get the very specific location. You'll be able to do a Google Dork, for example, where let's say that instead of adding the area code in with the phone number, you just use the 7 digits. You take those 7 digits, you append them to a specific city or a specific location within a state or a country, and you search for it that way instead of having to only rely on the area code being an exact match. So for example, if you have 555, 123, 1234, and there's no hits for that, you can always just search for 123, 1234, and then manually enter in the physical location that you were able to discover using those methods. Then from there, you want to start actually checking applications. So if you have access to a different or an available reverse phone number enterprise tool, things like Epios, OSINT Industries, there's a ton that are out there. I think LOL Checker is another one. A variety of different things that essentially use the manual methods that you can aggregate over time to be able to automate some of the searching. Definitely throw the phone numbers into there, but you also want to be able to check things manually, because sometimes these methods might work for you to directly interact with these applications, but they may not work when done at scale. So for example, if you have an application like Words with Friends, that old game that people used to play, you can import contacts. You can be able to see if you're able to match that to a specific person's display name, an image that maybe can verify gender, things like that. Whereas an enterprise platform may not be able to do that because they aren't able to reverse engineer that method, or the method has changed to an extent that they are unable to actively maintain it. There's a variety of other methods that we mention here as well, but the key takeaway here is that you need a process, and this will be relevant later on in the episode that I'm going to be covering when we talk about using AI. You need a process. You need to be able to define that process so that you can have repetitive, reproducible results, and you're not going to have a completely different outcome every single time you do an investigation. From there, we talk about things like high value pivots, right? You have a phone number. What is the next best thing that you can find when you pivot from a phone number? We mentioned things like usernames, social media accounts, breach data. One thing that's missing from here, obviously, is email addresses. The more verifiable, discrete information that you can find that's associated to a phone number, the better and more easy it's going to be to expand your investigation, to be able to use different methods in order to expand the scope and gather more evidence. So if you have a phone number and you can associate that to an email address, now you can do reverse email searching. You can parse a username from an email address. You can check a variety of different methods that are associated to a specific email provider like Gmail or ProtonMail, etc. So those are the things that you definitely want to look out for. Now, there are some cautions that you want to make sure that you're aware of before you dig straight in. A lot of times people use burner phone numbers. This is something that's very standard in operational security, especially if you're looking into criminal activity, anything fraudulent or anything like that. Expect to find operational security. You might find voice over IPs. You might find Mint Mobile devices that are used as burner phones, for example. So don't always take information that you find and assume that it's 100% accurate. A lot of people will be able to send you on a false trail by creating a bunch of accounts. And one of the reasons why one of the key indicators that you're probably on a bad trail is if you find a variety of different names, images, or different account types that are associated to a phone number, even if that phone number is very specific. So for example, if you put a phone number into a reverse phone number search tool and you get 15 different names, and when you look into those names, let's say they're social media accounts, they're all roughly the same age, or they're all roughly created at the same time, then you'll run into issues where this is clearly somebody who's just trying to pump in as many different accounts as they possibly can. They could have several sock puppets associated with those accounts. And so this is definitely something you want to keep an eye out for. You're looking for consistency in results. You want to find John Smith 15 different times with the same photos, for example. You don't want to find John Smith, Jane Doe, Mark, whomever in a bunch of different types of search results. So definitely keep that in mind. Okay, so that's it for this episode or this issue of the OSINT Newsletter issue number 107. You can check it out at osintnewsletter.com/107. This is a free issue, and I want you to keep this one in mind because it does discuss a step-by-step process that you can use to very consistently get a intelligence result from a phone number lookup. In the next part, we're going to be talking about how you can use AI to automate these processes and create a repository of different methods that you can use and instruct your AI agents to be able to do these things on your behalf. So let's go ahead and jump into that now. That takes us into issue number 108. Again, it's titled Codifying Open Source Intelligence Methodology with AI. Now, if you want to follow along, go ahead and head on over to osintnewsletter.com/108. In typical fashion, I'm going to be covering 3 things from the news section as well as 3 tools from the tools section. I want you to pay extra attention to the news section because it will be relevant later on when we talk about codifying methodology with AI. Now, the first thing I want to mention is a Medium article posted by Precious Vincent, and it is called How to Investigate a Person of Interest in 2026. There are a lot of articles that are out there that show you how to investigate a person of interest. I've also created tons of content around the topic, but it is very difficult to keep these things in sync or up to date with modern times. A lot of tools will go out of service. There will be methodologies that change. There'll be new data regulations that pull information off of the market. So you're always wanting to be on the lookout for new methodology. And this particular article is written with 2026 in mind. It includes tools, tactics, and techniques using the available methodology. And I won't go into the specifics because it is a long article, but I will be talking about it later because this is a guide that you can then codify into a Claude or an LLM skill that will allow you to use a variety of different methods on your command that will be able to take a collection and analysis phase that is something that's typically done manually. It's something that you can do on a more reproducible way, but we'll discuss that a little bit more later. On that same note, the second thing that I talk about in the news section is called Inside Modern OSINT, Detecting Disinformation, Tools of the Trade, and the Ethics That Shape It. This one is written by Impact Grid, and it is looking through disinformation through different timing patterns, right? When were things posted, account behavior, pattern of life, those types of things. Cross-platform signals, what you see on an account like x.com versus Discord versus Telegram, etc. And also being able to use verification tools, like being able to verify if an image is AI generated, if an image is quote unquote photoshopped or edited in any way. Other tools like geolocation, the availability of information on the Wayback Machine, and a variety of other different methods that you can use to detect disinformation. This is another guide that you can use that I'll talk about later, that you can codify into a process that you'll be able to execute on a very recurring, consistent basis using AI. A little bit more on that in a second. The last one, and this is a little bit of a heavy read, so apologies in advance if you aren't the academic type, but I thought that this was very interesting and very relevant. It is titled Signals in the Noise, Open Source Intelligence for AI Loss of Control Detection. Now, this is a very advanced concept. It is an academic paper, but it maps threat models, observable traces like user transcripts and inference choke points, plus monitoring techniques that you can use in the available methodology. Essentially what you're looking for is, and I mentioned this in a few different articles or a few other episodes recently, is that here in the future, and that future seems to be happening now, is that instead of investigating individuals or let's say investigating the artifacts of individuals, you're going to be investigating artifacts that are generated by AI. Instead of figuring out who is the person who's producing it, because the content is typically being produced by artificial intelligence, you're going to be trying to find the individual or the organizations that are behind the production of AI generated content. And this is why I think it's very relevant. It's very interesting to read. And because it is an advanced concept, this is another prime candidate for what I'll talk about in a little bit, which is codifying the methodology that they discuss in this paper, turning it into a workflow, and then finding tools that will be able to automate the collection and analysis of that so that you can see an intelligence requirement. You can do a significant amount of the work up front using AI. And then instead of you having to spend all of this tedious time collecting, analyzing, and processing data, you are going to be able to have a good chunk of that done. You can see the results. And I will caveat that this isn't a sort of silver bullet for the intelligence cycle. This is a way to get a lot of work done asynchronously. And you can multi-thread some of this work and do it all, all at the same time instead of having to do it in a serial fashion. This is going to get you the 70-80% solution of information, which then you can then take and spend your time taking that 80% and pushing the last 20% of it into an insight that decision makers can use based on your intelligence. So definitely check out the paper. I've linked the PDF. It's written by several different academics, and I think it's going to be very relevant. And this is going to seem like pretty old news here pretty soon. Okay, that takes us into the tools section of the OSINT newsletter, and there are 3 different tools that I'll be covering. The first tool on the list is called Open OSINT, and in typical fashion, it's going to match the theme of the entire episode. And this is an AI-powered OSINT agent, and it's a CLI tool that you can use to chain a lot of different tools together. There are 16 total tools that are being integrated into Open OSINT. And this is going to be something that I will be discussing on how you can build something similar of your own. And this is something that I will outline a little bit later. But these modules that are included, once again, are mostly technical intelligence related tools. So if you're doing person search, business search, etc., they may be relevant, but they may not be relevant. Some of the ones that are listed are email, username, breach, who is, IP. Those things are all relevant to most people. However, there are checks on different sources like Shodan, VirusTotal, Census, Abuse IP, DB, GitHub, etc., that may not be relevant to your use case. But what I really like about it is that it combines enterprise APIs like Anthropic with publicly free sources like Ollama, where Ollama is not as powerful, but it is inexpensive, if not completely free, and can do basic tasks. Anthropic will handle most of the heavier lifts when it comes to tasks that require more reasoning. There's a variety of different tools that are built in, like PDF and Markdown reports. This is something I'll talk about in a second, where you want to have some disseminating or some ability to disseminate the information that you're pulling from your agents. And there's a variety of other tools that are included. So this will be the inspiration that you can use. And some of the plugins like Holhi, or I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, Holehi, Sherlock, and those types of tools that I've talked about in previous episodes. This also includes some of those tools as well. So this is a very good inspiration if you're looking to build your own set of tools using AI, whether you want to do this directly within the Claude environment or build your own like they do with OpenOSINT. This is definitely a good place to check it out. So I list this. It's a GitHub project. It's free to check out. You can find it on GitHub if you just look at OpenOSINT. I believe it's an organization called OpenOSINT, so it should be very easy to decipher between one and the other. They also have a website listed, openosint.tech, if you're interested. The next thing on the list is called Open Graph Intel, and it's very similar in look and feel as Maltego. It is a graph-first OSINT-ready platform that allows you to interact with a variety of different data points very easily, whether it's username searches, domain to IP, URL to HTTP headers, emails to domains. There's a ton of different transforms, and they even use similar nomenclature that Maltego uses. So if you were looking to diversify your different sources of tools, which is something I always recommend, right? I don't think that this is going to be as robust as using Maltego if you're familiar with using that tool, but it is something to get familiar with in the event, let's say you lose budget for Maltego. Maltego's price goes up and you get priced out, for example, or they lose the capability, or you're running into too many issues with transforms you're trying to use, or maybe a third-party tool that integrates into Maltego goes somewhere else. You want to make sure that you have a backup plan, and this is something that is good to use, especially if you're a hobbyist or an entry-level investigator, or you're in an investigative shop that has a very low budget. You can check it out. I have it listed in the second list of the tools section, but you can also see it at ogi.khas.app. So again, that is Oscar Golf Indigo Kilo Hotel Alpha Sierra app. Easier to find that way. Okay, the last tool on the list, and it's not really a tool, it's more of a resource, but it's something that's going to be very relevant if you want to stay up to date with the times. I avoided talking about AI too heavily on this newsletter, or in this newsletter and on this podcast for a while, because I felt there was a lot of value that could be done by you being the last man or last woman standing that knows how to do manual investigative methods, where everybody else is just pumping shit into AI and coming up with a bunch of slop, and everyone's going to look at their products and say, okay, these are all garbage. I can see a ton of M dashes. I can see that this is something that they didn't even put any effort into, whereas your byproduct will be something that is very meticulously reviewed and is something that's very polished and ready for digestion. I think that now, because there's a lot of different tools and the market has responded accordingly to those problems, there's a hybrid of the two of them now. You can do a significant chunk of the work using agents, and then you can do the final 20% of the work with the humans to be able to clean the garbage, pull all the information out. And instead of having to write your own scripts and build your own tools and all these things that we had to do previously, you had to learn Python, you had to write all your own scripts, you had to read documentation, you had to do all this crap. Now you don't have to read the documentation anymore. You don't have to write the scripts. AI is going to be able to do all that for you. And the reason why that's valuable is because it saves you time and it makes you a superhuman very quickly. You can create a tool that will be able to expedite your investigative workflow, and you can do it today. You don't have to spend weeks on it and then constantly have to triage bugs and issues that are, being seen with the tools that you're building. All of that can be automated. But the stopping point is where you do not want, essentially the way I see it is that you want AI to execute what you think it should do, and you should not go to AI to figure out what you should think, right? You should not say, okay, AI, how would you solve this problem? Because it's going to give you a garbage answer, most likely. Instead, you can say, hey, I have this problem. Here's how I want to solve it. And I want you to create a solution for this thing that I think will work. I think, at least as the time of this recording, that's the best way to do it, is you want to use AI to build something stable. You do not want to build something stable that uses AI, because you can never trust whether or not the output is actually accurate without a human in the loop. Now, with that rant aside, I did include a list of courses that are produced by Anthropic that gets you really spun up on how to use Claude, their enterprise or I guess even commercial AI tooling that you can use either in the CLI or in a desktop application. The reason why I've moved away from using VS Code and Copilot and moved into using Claude Code and Claude Chat is that I've just noticed now that they are starting to ratchet up the pricing and maybe ratchet up the throttling and throughput of some of these AI devices or AI solutions. I'm starting to see a very large drop in quality with Copilot and VS Code. The context windows are incredibly small. It kind of loses its train of thought much more frequently than it did maybe a couple months ago. It seems like Claude Code is doing a better job of it, and they also have a lot of very easy and user-friendly integrations that you can use. So you definitely want to run through that course. There's a bunch of different courses. You can get a certificate of completion as well if you're looking to build your resume and show that you know what you're doing when it comes to building AI solutions. But the reason why you should check this out is not only will it be relevant for you, but it'll also help prepare you for some of the prerequisites that you need to know to understand what I'm going to talk about next, which is codifying open source intelligence methodology with AI. Now, in the last episode, which followed along on issue number 106 of the OSINT Newsletter, if you want to check that out, it is osintnewsletter.com/106. I talked about how you can take a process that you create, right? In this case, it was a username search, and then the output of a username search from Sherlock, being able to take those pivots and continue to investigate those pivots, identify intelligence gaps, etc. That's what I talked about last time, and that relies on you knowing methods that you can execute manually, that you want to automate and do, on a daily basis, or maybe multi-threading or anything like that. What this issue talks about, and it is sort of piggybacking on that concept, is instead of you having to know methods, you want to start discovering methods that other people publish, putting those and codifying those into instructions and building out your list of skills or your list of instructions for your AI to be able to execute whenever you want. So let's say you don't want just a username search. You want to be able to have an entire workflow for investigating people or investigating typo squats or investigating whatever it may be, vulnerability analysis where you find artifacts of individuals that are in vulns, or maybe a variety of different things, right? Essentially, the point of this article is, hey, you want to discover how to investigate things, right? Whether it, like I said, whether it's people related, thing related, whatever. I talk about methods of how you can discover some of these guides, right? So I mentioned one of them in the news section, which is how to investigate a person of interest in 2026. Another one that I discovered along the way by just using a simple Google dork, which is in title and in quotes, how to investigate, was how to investigate typo squats, which was produced by Recorded Future. Essentially what you want to do is you want to be able to find as many of these as you can. And these are ones that have to be accurate and they have to be relevant and timely. They can't be very old because the methods might be out of date. But you essentially want to harvest that information, including the images from those guides, be able to have your AI turn those into guidelines for the LLMs to be able to execute them. And here's the important part, right? And this is something I kind of, step through some of these struggles in the written version of this in the newsletter, so I encourage you to read it, is that there are inherent problems with just firing and forgetting, scraping all of the text out of a guide, all of the images, putting it into an LLM and say, turn this into a skill that I can use to repeat this process over and over, because a lot of times it'll reference tools, it'll reference guides that are behind paywalls, require API keys, or they require manual methods that will often be rate limited if you try to do them in an automated way. That's why I talk about in this article that you need to take the guide, you need to be able to turn it into a skill, and then here's the critical part. You need to be able to test the skill, identify the intelligence gaps, close the intelligence gaps, and continuously tune your skills to be able to perform and produce the results that you want. In addition to that, you also want to be able to produce reasonable, readable intelligence reports based on the methods that are being produced. Because again, you're not just going to be producing some sort of AI generated report, handing it to your stakeholders and say, here's what I think you should do. Here's the intelligence. Here's my recommendations. That's not going to fly. They're going to look at it and say, this was written by AI. What the hell have you been doing all day? And if you're honest, you're probably going to say, I've just been goofing around with AI and I haven't actually been looking at what it's been producing. And that's a mistake. You want to be able to take the 80% solution, review it, augment it, add the human touch to it, and be able to produce intelligence twice as fast, 3 times as fast, 4 times as fast without producing crappy results. And so this sort of talks about how you can take the username search method that I mentioned in issue number 106 or the previous podcast, if you're listening, and be able to stack different skills on top of it. So for example, you run a username search on Jake Krebs, for example, me. You find all this information. It finds all of this emails and all these different things that are associated with that handle. Then, based on Precious Vincent's article that he posted on Medium, it then runs it through a new method, which is person search. It takes all the information that was produced from the username search and continues to use his methodology that you've now augmented because you've tested it out. You've added different tools that you know are on GitHub. Maybe you have some enterprise APIs that you have access to. You get all of those hooked up and configured so that the agent is being able to reference all of those things. It takes the username search, it pivots on over to the person search. Based on the results of the person search, it gives you new intelligence gaps, new things that it wish it had, but it doesn't have access to. You can create new skills and then once again, chain these things together. So before you know it, you can produce the results of an entire intelligence agency without having to actually have a person that knows all these methods. You can continuously harvest these methods online, find all these new guides. You can find them on social media. You can find them on a variety of different blog platforms. You can even go back through the entire archive of the OSINT newsletter, pull out all of the guides that we've produced, codify all of those into methodologies, into skills that the AI agents can use, and then tune them until you can produce insane number of results. Whether that's a single giant skill that you want that runs through like a 50, 100-step process, or whether you want to isolate them into specific modules and be able to run them one at a time. So if you just need a quick answer and you don't want to burn through 100,000 tokens running through this insane result, you can just do /username or /person search or /typo squad, for example, and you can run through these steps, get a report, do your analysis, discuss with your team, and be able to figure out what is the intelligence, what is the signal from the noise that we want to pass off to our stakeholders so they can make good decisions that they will not regret. So that's what I talk about in this issue. It's a very high level overview. I have a lot of different skills that I provide. So unfortunately, Substack doesn't allow me to share skill files or markdown files. So I had to put everything into a PDF, but I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3 different PDF downloads that you can check out that shows different skills for person search, typo squatting, etc., what I was able to create and reproduce. I share a bunch of different screenshots of what the outputs of those things look like. So if you want to see some of the mistakes that the AI makes and how you can correct them, for example, there's a lot of different examples in here as well that you can look to model. And if you wanted to, you can build them from scratch, or you can take the skills that I produce and you can continue to augment them with your own requirements. But it's definitely something that I think you should get familiar with, not only because we have an economy that's dramatically shifting to an AI first sort of infrastructure. So you want to be the person who knows how to build all of these things. You want to be able to have a whole arsenal of the tools that you're looking to use. But on top of it, it's going to be very useful for your day-to-day work, even if you're not looking for a job, even if you're not trying to build job security in this changing market. So definitely something worth checking out. There's some things that I really want to see if AI can pull off, things like death by CAPTCHA, getting past CAPTCHAs. I've even seen some articles where they're able to solve visual CAPTCHAs that if, let's say you're using Playwright, you go directly onto a web page or a platform, you're able to log in, you're able to do all of this stuff in a headless browser, and you're able to even solve CAPTCHAs accordingly. These are all really cool things and different skills that you can use to build out your entire intelligence framework. So definitely give this a check out. It is, again, osintnewsletter.com/108. And if you're really interested in this type of content, make sure to subscribe. Every other week, we have a free issue, and these are often going to be guides that you can use and you can codify using your agents. But then every other week, besides that, on the off weeks, this is when we do the traditional OSINT newsletter with the news, the tools, and then a specific technique or methodology that I cover behind the paywall. So definitely give that a look. And that's it for this episode. Again, issue number 107/107 or issue number 108. Follow along, check them out. And we hope to hear or see from you again in about 2 weeks when the next podcast comes out. See you then.